Now on this video, we're going to do some basic carbon fiber repair to a Bimota lower fairing. The lower fairings where the two connect seems to be a vulnerable part on this bike. We have fixed it with carbon once before. I don't know if the bike was crashed or if it was just vibration or just general use, but this is the second time we're repairing the lower fairing. We've already done the upper fairings. And the lower fairing now, where it has to be repaired, is going to be a big job. I'm going to do some of it with CA, some of it with epoxy, and most of the strength of the repair will be with carbon fiber. But at the very end, we had to replace a small piece of it with Bondo. This part, apparently the bike was dripping or leaking a little bit of oil, so I've got to really clean this part well. And the bottom piece where these fairings come together, this part, we've already reinforced it with carbon fiber. I think this is a part we've reinforced more than once. We're going to have to sand some of that down, put some fresh CA on it and some fresh carbon. So I guess this would be a day like today. We'll just try to get started on the biggest part first. Anytime I do any work that requires CA or paint work, or in this case carbon fiber, or both, no matter what, I always want to start with a part as clean as I can make it. Simple green, of course, and then some degreaser and a lot of paper towels. By doing that, I just make it, this is hard enough work without making it harder. Now we had previously fixed this part, especially on the bottom. There was some areas that we already had carbon fibered once, but these parts are very, very delicate. All these exotic bikes are very delicate, and they're going to need constant maintenance like this in the future. We're going to patch it up. So when the part is totally clean and you know there's no grit, no oil, nothing left on it, a power sander is an easy way to get a nice etch on it before we actually do the repair and make sure that we're going to get a good bond from the CA and the carbon. And so we don't have to reinforce these parts anymore in the future. And it's always good to realize any repair you're doing like this, to get the bond, you need to have the part super clean. If you're trying to bond epoxy or CA, in this case we're going to use both, to something that's either smooth or oily or both, the bond is going to be of no value. Now, even the old repair we did held up in spots, but where it was really taking a beating was where the two bolts come together. And I think part of this is just a poor design, the way they bolted these two pieces together. They should have left more material there. It just made for what I think is a stress riser. And so now the second time we do this repair, I want to make sure this is never going to break again. So I kind of overdid it. I put on 6-ounce carbon fiber mat. Now, once the part is clean and etched, there are cracks in this. And this is a part you got to remember. This is super thin. The plastic it's made out of is really thin. I'm always amazed on all exotic bikes how they make these parts so thin. The Buell that we did recently was really thin. Amazing. Now, Vlad has since replaced that with carbon fiber bodywork. But this is a whole nother thing. You can't just go to eBay and buy these parts at any reasonable price. I don't think you can buy them new at any price. So doing this repair work like we're doing here, and I'm using 6-ounce carbon, this is going to be epoxied in place. The CA helps seal the cracks. It's capillary. And we're going to put on a real, I hope this is overkill, beyond overkill here, to get this to be strong, because this part for some reason on this particular bike really takes a beating. And this is a twin cylinder bike, so you know there's a lot of resonant vibration on it, and it must be, I just assume it vibrates down at the bottom like this. And if you didn't do this repair, you'd just be buying parts over and over again, and you can't really buy them. So anyway, not to belabor the point here, I got the epoxy. It's Brodak epoxy. You can use any good high quality 5-minute epoxy for this. That'll be fine. I hit it with a hair dryer once I spread it out a little bit. Let it cure before I do any sanding or shaping or anything on it, but just I'm trying to put some of this in fast forward so the video doesn't get too long. But to make the point that when you find a place on a fairing like this that's a stress riser and it cracks, and if it cracks the second time, then you really have to overdo it. I mean, you really have to go like what we're doing right now. This to me is really overkill. Now I've never had to do this amount of repair on any of the bikes that have thicker fairings, but the ones that have these very, very thin, and I understand why they do this, they want the bike to be lighter and everything, but boy, when it cracks, is it ever a problem? And if you go back on the channel and you see the work we had to do to the Vlad's Buell and this bike just was a nightmare to get this done. Now, this video doesn't cover any of the paint work. That's a whole nother issue, but you always want to do the repair, the epoxy work, the CA, the carbon fiber, any of the work that's not cosmetic. You always want to do that before you do paint work. And it's so important when I try to show people how to do some of these things that they're a little complicated and how I've done them. What's really tricky, and it's so basic, is to get all the structural stuff done first before you even attempt to do any of the paint work. Now, we're going to do the paint work on a future video. That's a whole nother video. This is a video just showing what you have to do to get ready to do the paint work and to get things reinforced. Now, even if in this case, if there were any cracks around the tabs, I would reinforce the tabs same way I did on a Buell. But anytime you're dealing with the real thin bodywork, and the exotic bikes, the Benellis and the Bimotas, they all seem to have this same thing of very, very thin bodywork. That's a hell of a way to save weight. But anyway, CA, again, it's capillary. It goes in, it fills any of the internal cracks, and then I can do the final sand out on this part, get it flat, because I want to make it like a sandwich where it has that big crack. I want to have some e-glass on this side, and I have the carbon fiber to 6 ounce on the other side. And this is just light 1.5 ounce e-glass, a little CA, and that makes it like a sandwich. So I have some composite material on both sides, and then I can sand it out by hand. I have to drill, spot the holes with a burr. I don't ever put a drill near carbon fiber because it tends to catch and crack the part. I just burn through, and you can see right at the end of this it's going to smoke when the burr goes through. But that's so much less risk than running a drill. Even a step drill tends to catch. Now, every time I sand this, I want to get the shape as close as I possibly can, so when I do the final finishing, the cosmetics part, there are no valleys, no ridges. I'm using a small hard block to get all the shapes exactly the way I want them. Because from this point on, it's just going to be paintwork. Once that's smooth, it's reinforced on both sides. It's like a sandwich now. And where the crack is and where it would be prone to crack again, I want to get that as strong as possible. Now, the next part of this is something I try to avoid at all costs, is using Bondo. But in this case, the shape of the part I had to make, the overall shape, it lent itself to using Bondo a lot more than to any other method that I would know how to use. So I built up that area inside with a couple layers of Bondo, and this is I've found in the past, sometimes you have to bite the bullet with Bondo because there's just no other way to do it. But anyway, this was easy to shape. Once I get the Bondo cured, I'm going to take it, and by hand I'm going to shape that part, because this is a part of the bike that was missing. Now, either from the crash, and I don't remember if this was a crash or if this was just general wear and tear, getting that piece sanded into shape was pretty labor intensive. And I started with, of course, carving away any of the extra material I could with a sharp razor. You can get a certain amount. I can shape it. But the final shaping with a sanding block and some 600 sandpaper, I would always start with something a little rougher than 600, maybe 320, but then work my way down. And of course, with a sanding block. You can't sand anything like this by hand and realistically. but you can get a lot of it with the razor out. And it just makes it a little bit easier, because once the Bondo gets near the shape you want, then you don't want to have sanding scratches in it. So you want to go finer and finer grits of paper until you're down probably to 400 or 600, and that'll accept the primer then from that point on. But this part of it just becomes a real labor of love. There's a lot of little hours go into this, and I wanted to leave some of this part of it in real time so you could get some idea how long this took to do. And you can't imagine sometimes a little part like this, you have a big giant repair, it takes an hour, and then a little part like this takes 4 hours. And it seems like that's always the way it is with this kind of work. The stuff that you think is going to take an incredible amount of time, now I had to get that shape exactly right, or you're going to see it in the final part. And again, this is a bike that, because it's an exotic bike and it's very expensive, I wouldn't want to have any substandard work on it if it was a $300 bike or an old rusty RD. Always want it to be as good as I can make it. And once it's done, and once you see the shape that you're going to be happy with, now I want to go over the part that I repaired with another layer of epoxy. Because what's going to happen, that part, I know that's where this part is going to be prone to crack again. I don't know because I was not the one that assembled and disassembled the bike. I don't know if part of the problem is that you're under such a stress there, or the exhaust pipes to the bike wind up near there. I don't know what is causing that part to break over and over, or if there's just an alignment issue. A lot of times when you have bikes and you force parts together and then tighten a bolt, you put them under a tremendous stress. And in this case, because they're under the bike, you're not prone to see it all the time, but the stress is still there. And I think that's what the case is with this. And so once I got the final layer of epoxy on there, and that'll help, because we know this bike is dripping oil a little bit. It'll protect the carbon fiber a little bit. Never hurts to have an extra layer, an extra coat of ordinary epoxy on that. Hitting it with a hairdryer will give it a nice smooth finish, relatively smooth anyway, even though you're not going to see it. But the biggest lesson of all is, and it's a lesson that you learn over and over again when you do this work, is you got to get all the structure right. All of the structure on the part, so it's solid, it's not bending, it's not prone to cracking. And once you have all the structure done, then you can move on to the cosmetic painting. And we're going to do that on a future video. But right now, that part is going to dry overnight. I like to let all the epoxy and everything dry overnight before I work on it again. But that part, hopefully now, what we've accomplished in this video is to take a part that really could have been damaged even worse, because if that part broke off and fell off the bike and you don't have it, that would really be challenging then to find that part. But we caught it just in time before it broke and fell off, and hopefully the new repair is going to last. Well, the first one lasted, I think, 2 or 3 years. I guess we're going to find out how long this lasts. But this is a daily driver bike, and it's a twin. There's a lot of vibration on those parts. So just to review, and again, this is very basic stuff. Clean the part before you do anything. Etch the part before you do epoxy or CA. Keep it as clean as possible during the whole repair. Whenever there's a crack like that, use CA to help the crack not propagate. Put the carbon fiber on both sides or e-glass, and you'll guarantee a little bit better guarantee that it'll not crack again. And in the case of any bike with these thin fairing parts, reinforce it way beyond what you think it needs. And thanks so much for watching.